He knew he was unhappy. Not depressed, not in crisis, not falling apart. Just quietly unhappy. And that made it harder. Because there was nothing dramatic to blame. He had a stable job, a steady income, a house that was almost paid off. People around him assumed he was doing fine. And in many ways, he was. That's what kept him stuck. After 40, dissatisfaction rarely looks like chaos. It looks like routine. You wake up, you go to work, you pay bills, you scroll at night. You repeat. No disaster, no explosion, just a slow fading of excitement. He noticed it first on Sunday evenings, that tight feeling in his chest. Not fear, just heaviness. He stopped talking about the future, stopped making plans beyond the next vacation, stopped imagining anything bigger. And the most dangerous thought crept in. This is probably as good as it gets. That sentence didn't break him. It shrank him. For many men over 40, the real risk isn't failure. It's comfort without growth. When nothing is wrong, but nothing is moving either. He wasn't trapped by poverty. He wasn't trapped by tragedy. He was trapped by acceptable stability. And that kind of trap doesn't feel urgent, which is exactly why it's powerful. For 15 years, nothing had gone terribly wrong. He had a stable job, not exciting, not inspiring, but stable. The paycheck arrived on time. It covered the bills. The mortgage was almost done. Retirement accounts existed, even if he rarely checked them. From the outside, it looked responsible. His co-workers knew him. Same lunch spots, same jokes, same Monday meetings that blended into one another. There was comfort in predictability. No sudden shocks, no dramatic risks, no need to prove himself again. And every time a quiet doubt surfaced, he had an answer ready. At least I'm not unemployed. At this age, starting over is reckless. Safe is better. Those sentences sounded practical, mature, even wise. But slowly, they became armor. Not against failure, against growth. The routine felt efficient, but it also felt smaller each year. He stopped asking what he wanted. He only asked what was secure, and that's how comfort works. It doesn't shout. It soothes. It numbs urgency. It dulls ambition. It softens dissatisfaction just enough to make it tolerable. Comfort creates emotional anesthesia. You don't feel pain strongly enough to change, and you don't feel excitement strongly enough to expand. Everything becomes manageable, and manageable slowly replaces meaningful. He thought he was protecting his life. He didn't realize he was shrinking it, one safe decision at a time. The signs were never dramatic. That's why he ignored them. It started with Sunday evenings. That subtle heaviness in his chest. Not panic, not dread. Just a quiet resistance to Monday. He brushed it off. Everyone feels this. Then came the small withdrawals. He stopped volunteering ideas at meetings, stopped learning new tools, stopped imagining promotion as something for him. When younger colleagues spoke about new skills, new plans, new risks, he smiled. But inside, he felt distance, not because he couldn't grow, because he chose not to try. He told himself it was maturity, but it was caution turning into fear. Years passed without measurable progress. No new competencies, no expanded network, no bold moves, just maintenance. And maintenance feels responsible until the world moves forward without you. The most dangerous warning sign wasn't exhaustion, it was indifference. When you stop asking, What else could I become? That's when identity begins to shrink. After 40, stagnation rarely feels like crisis. It feels like stability. And that illusion is powerful because it keeps you comfortable enough not to act. Let me ask you something. Have you felt that quiet heaviness before the week starts? If any part of this feels familiar, comment 1 below. Not because something is wrong with you, but because awareness is the first break in the illusion. The real damage wasn't visible. It was internal. At first, he told himself he was simply being cautious. But caution slowly turned into avoidance. When new systems were introduced at work, he let the younger staff experiment with them. When leadership roles opened, he convinced himself he didn't need the stress. When conversations shifted toward future plans, he quietly changed the subject. It wasn't laziness. It was fear, not fear of failing loudly. Fear of being exposed quietly. What if he tried something new and discovered he was no longer competitive? What if learning felt harder than it used to? What if the confidence he relied on only existed inside familiar territory? So he stayed where he felt safe. Inside tasks he had mastered. Inside routines he could control. But safety without testing creates fragility. The less he challenged himself, the more fragile his confidence became. He began protecting his position more than his potential. After 40, fear rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as practicality. You don't say, "I'm scared." You say, "I'm being realistic." But realism without growth slowly becomes surrender. And surrender, over time, reshapes identity in ways you don't notice until something forces you to. The change did not explode into his life. It adjusted. A restructuring announcement, a shift in company direction, new metrics, new expectations. At first, he felt secure. 15 years in the same place felt like insulation. He knew the workflow, he understood the clients, he believed experience carried weight. But markets reward relevance more than history. Gradually, the signals became harder to ignore. High-visibility projects were assigned elsewhere. Strategic meetings happened without him. Younger colleagues were labeled forward-facing. His role didn't disappear. It narrowed. The paycheck continued. But growth slowed. Bonuses shrank from motivating to modest. Raises barely matched rising costs. Promotions required skills he hadn't developed. Nothing dramatic. Just compression. Meanwhile, life expanded financially. Insurance premiums increased. House maintenance surfaced unexpectedly. Retirement calculations required larger monthly contributions. For the first time, he reviewed his numbers with discomfort, not fear, pressure. He realized something subtle but serious. His income had plateaued years ago, but expenses hadn't. And plateauing income in an inflating world creates silent tension. He had equated stability with protection. But stability without skill expansion limits earning power. He hadn't been irresponsible. He had been static. Mahan's static positioning weakens leverage. When the company adjusted roles again, he lacked negotiation strength. Not because he lacked loyalty, because he lacked updated value. He didn't lose everything. He lost upward momentum. And upward momentum, once flattened after 45, requires deliberate effort to rebuild. Safety had delayed risk. It had not removed it. The financial pressure was uncomfortable. But the deeper hit was personal. For years, He had introduced himself through his role. His title carried quiet pride. It explained his value. It justified his long hours. It gave structure to his identity. Now that structure felt unstable. When responsibilities shifted, something inside him shifted too. If he was no longer essential, who was he? He noticed small changes in his behavior. He spoke less in meetings. He avoided conversations about future strategy. He hesitated when someone asked about long-term plans. It wasn't just income that had plateaued. It was identity. He had spent years becoming competent in one environment. Now the environment was evolving without him. And competence tied to one system does not always transfer. That realization was unsettling. He began questioning his relevance. Not dramatically, quietly. Am I still competitive? Would another company see my value? Have I fallen behind without noticing? These questions didn't destroy him. They destabilized him. Because when identity is built on stability, change feels like exposure. After 40, identity often fuses with occupation. When occupation shifts, self-perception trembles. He didn't fear poverty. He feared irrelevance. And irrelevance strikes deeper than financial loss. It challenges meaning. That was the moment he understood. Comfort had protected routine, but it had quietly weakened self-definition. The lesson did not arrive as motivation. It arrived as clarity. He realized something uncomfortable. He had confused comfort with protection. For years, he believed staying put reduced risk. But staying put had only reduced visibility of risk. There is a difference between feeling safe and being prepared. Feeling safe comes from familiarity. Being prepared comes from expansion. He had optimized for predictability. He had not optimized for adaptability. And adaptability determines leverage. Markets shift. Industries evolve. Skills depreciate if they are not updated. Standing still in a dynamic environment is not neutral. It slowly weakens positioning. The hardest part was admitting this to himself. Not blaming the company, not blaming the economy, not blaming younger competition, just acknowledging a simple fact. He had stopped stretching, not because he was incapable, because stretching felt unnecessary. After 40, growth can feel optional. It isn't. Growth becomes strategic insurance, not against layoffs, against irrelevance. Comfort is not dangerous by itself. But comfort without deliberate expansion creates fragility. That was the real lesson. Stability should fund growth, not replace it. And once he understood that distinction, he could no longer hide behind the illusion that time alone would secure his future. He didn't wake up inspired. He woke up aware. And awareness changes decisions. He didn't resign dramatically. He didn't announce a bold reinvention. He began smaller. He updated his resume, not to send it immediately, but to see himself clearly. He enrolled in a certification program he had postponed for years. It felt uncomfortable, slower than it used to. But finishing each module rebuilt something subtle. Self-trust. He volunteered for a cross-functional project at work. Not glamorous, but outside his routine. He forced himself to speak in meetings again, even when his voice felt uncertain. The shift wasn't visible to everyone. It was structural. He stopped guarding his current position and started increasing his market value. He scheduled conversations with people in adjacent industries. He listened more than he talked. He studied where demand was growing, not obsessively, strategically. For the first time in years, he felt forward movement, not explosive growth, momentum. And momentum restores confidence. After 45, transformation doesn't look dramatic. It looks disciplined, measured, intentional. He understood something critical. Growth is not about chasing excitement. It is about maintaining leverage. He didn't need to outrun younger competitors. He needed to stay expandable. The circumstances around him hadn't changed yet, but his positioning had. And positioning determines trajectory. This time, he wasn't protecting comfort. He was rebuilding optionality. One deliberate step at a time. He was never truly stuck. He was comfortable. And comfort had slowly convinced him that stillness was safety. But stillness in a changing world is a decision. Every year you choose not to expand, the world does not pause with you. It moves. Skills evolve, expectations shift, standards rise. The real danger after 40 is not failure. It is gradual irrelevance. Not because you lack intelligence, not because you lack experience, but because experience alone does not compound without adaptation. He didn't need a crisis to wake up. He needed honesty. Honesty about where he had stopped growing. Honesty about what staying the same was costing him. Financially, psychologically. Identity is not fixed. Leverage is not permanent. Security is not static. They require maintenance. Deliberate maintenance. Maybe you see parts of yourself in this story. Maybe you don't. But here's the question that matters. Are you protecting comfort or building capability? If this story felt familiar in any way, comment one below. Not as a confession, as a commitment. Because awareness is the first expansion. And expansion, at any age, is still a choice.